Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We will give it a couple more seconds for a few other people to log on and show they're here as we get started. Again, welcome. Thank you for joining us on this evening. We know you've had a busy day, a busy week, and here we are on a busy and long day. So thank you so much for your time. Before we get started with the agenda, we want to make sure that anyone who needs interpretation can access. So on this next slide, you will see the language interpretation button uh, guide. So if you need interpretation, please find that icon on the bottom of your screen. We have Vietnamese, Russian, Spanish, Chinese, and ASL interpretation available today. If you're joining us on Facebook and need ASL interpretation, please join us. Sorry, if you're on Facebook and need interpretation, you can find the link there to join us directly on Zoom, where you'll have access to the different languages. And on the next slide, we have a quick visual guide for question and answers features. The chat is disabled for this webinar, but you are able and we welcome your questions through the question and answer tool. There would be a icon, two little message bubbles on the bottom of your screen. Please enter your questions there. You are welcome to enter questions in the language that you speak, and we will do our best to, through our interpreters and through technology devices, interpret your question and assess it. If you're on Facebook, you can also enter questions via the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. We want to make sure to get through as many of these. And we'll also pause in between each agenda topic to answer questions as we go. For those that we don't have an opportunity to answer today, we'll do our best to get back to you with the appropriate answers as well. Great. So we'll move on to our agenda. We have three key topics for this afternoon. The first one is Delk customer service survey results. We'll be hearing an overview of what the findings were. We have our director, Alyssa Chatterjee, joining us today to recap and a couple updates on the 2025 legislative session, which is right underway. And lastly, we'll close with several agency and program updates. These will be a little bit of rapid fire, but we know it's important information for you to have. All right. So I'll go ahead and get us started by handing over to colleague Lizzie. I'll let you introduce yourself and take on the customer survey results information.
Thanks, Karina. Hi, everyone. My name is Lizzie Tremaine. I am with the Research Analysis and Data Office within Delk, and I am going to walk through some things about the customer service survey. I'll start first with why we do a customer service survey, what was included in the survey. I'll highlight some results from the survey, talk about how Delk has used the information from the survey so far, and where you're going to be able to learn more. Next slide. All right, so I'm going to pause because I heard the voice say recording has stopped, and now it's back. Okay. I will continue as if there wasn't an interruption. Hopefully everything is fine. So why does Delk do a customer service survey? When we became a full state agency in 2023. We joined all of the other state agencies in it being required for us to complete a customer service survey. But beyond the requirements from being a state agency, quality customer service is really essential for DELC in helping us achieve our mission and our vision. So much so that it shows up in our Growing Oregon Together strategic plan, specifically within the goals related to agency foundations and relationships. So this survey really allows us to measure DELC's efforts to achieving goals related to customer service. Next slide. So the customer service survey that went out last summer, August 1st through August 30th of 2024, had some different sections within it. So it had a series of questions that are required of all state agencies to ask. And we added some questions to help inform DELC's continuous improvement efforts. So we made sure to ask questions that were inspired by our staff's ideas about what they wanted to know about customer service and how customer service shows up in their work. We also asked some questions for participants to describe their relationship with DELC. What kind of customer are they of DELC's? What programs do they participate in? And lastly, we had a section that focused on participants' interactions with the Child Care Licensing Division for folks who interacted with the Child Care Licensing Division. Next slide. So I want to pause and say thank you. Nearly 400 people took the survey. Of those, about 300 said that they had been in contact with DELC staff within the last year. So all of the results that I'm going to show you are going to be with those nearly 300 respondents. And of those 300 respondents, about 200 of them were direct care providers. So we acknowledge that direct care providers are our largest customer group who was able to take part in the survey. And I really wanted to pause and appreciate the feedback that everyone was able to provide. Next slide. So since this is the provider information session, I wanted to highlight the provider types that we were able to hear from in this survey. So as you can see from the chart, we had a good representation of our different program license types. So we had about 36% from certified centers. We had about 30% from certified family, 19% from registered family. We had a number of folks from license exempt programs and some folks who weren't sure what kind of program they are in. Perhaps folks who are not necessarily involved in the licensing, but are teachers and aides and folks who might not know the specific program type. We also asked folks what sort of programs of DELC's that they participated. So the most common programs of the folks that responded to the survey included employment-related daycare, ERDC. So we had about 160 folks respond who had experience with that program. And Preschool Promise was the second largest program with 92 folks participating. So we can hop to the next slide. Since we don't have a whole lot of time, we decided to go with some highlights of the results. So on this slide and the next slide, we've chosen to highlight two strengths where we have higher ratings to show that, okay, DELC is maybe doing something good, something right in this space. And we have two opportunities for improvement. So those are the ones where the ratings were on the lower end. Some folks might have positive experiences, and there's more of an opportunity for us to make a difference in our interactions with customers. So on this first slide, DELC, along with other state agencies, are required to ask some questions about customer service and ask folks to rate Delk's customer service on a scale of poor, fair, good, and excellent. And we had a target that we would have 75% of respondents responding good or excellent. And on a couple of aspects of customer service, we got there. So helpfulness of employees, we had 79% of respondents say Delk is good or excellent at being helpful. We had 77% of respondents to the survey rate employees' knowledge and expertise as good or excellent. On the side where that wasn't as positive for us, we still had some positivity, but not quite as much overall. Timeliness of services, we had 67% of folks rate Delk as good or excellent. And we also had 66% say good or excellent to availability of information. In the survey, we also had the opportunity for folks to say in their own words what was going well and what could be improved. So in those open-ended results, we have some great insights into what is challenging about availability of information, or how important is timeliness and what does timeliness look like. So there's multiple ways that we were able to get information from this survey that are going to help us guide our response to the survey. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we also asked some additional questions. For these questions, we had a series of statements and we asked folks to rate their agreement. So from strongly disagree to strongly agree, how do you resonate with the sentences? So this is the level of agreement. So folks who agreed or strongly agreed. We have Delk staff treat me with respect. We had 82% of respondents agree with that statement. And Delk staff follow through on what they say they will do. We had 73% of folks respond. So we identify those as places where we're doing pretty well. Still space for us to learn more about what's not working for folks, but things seem to be doing pretty well. Opportunities to improve. Two of the statements that had the lowest level of agreement are, I know who to reach out to within Delk for assistance or information. We know there's a lot of folks within Delk doing lots of different work, so that's understandable. And Delk staff are responsive to my culture and identities, but both of those two were at a 62% agreement. Next slide. This is a quick summary slide of some of the strengths that I highlighted here and some of the opportunities to improve. While this is not the whole comprehensive results, just the highlights, I think they're quite meaningful for this conversation. And next slide. So I'll walk you through this texty slide. We wanted to talk about what has been done so far with the results. So what's been done so far, we've been able to share the results with Delk leadership teams. We have launched the Policies, Processes, and Procedures project. And one of those is Delk's first customer service policy, which is going to roll out pretty soon. There have also been some trainings developed that relate to supporting inclusive customer service, and that is newly required of all of Delk staff. And coming this spring, we're going to be able to share the results with all of Delk staff, not just leadership. And Delk business teams that interact with customers the most will engage in a couple of planning activities with the research evaluation and data, or research analysis and data office. So the focus for those will be website improvements and contact center improvements. So our phone and email lines. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this is just a high-level highlight of what we learned. And you can go to the customer service webpage, which should be linked. And you are more than welcome to read the executive summary or the full report. And you'll be able to request a full report if you need that report in a language other than English, and we can get that translated and sent to you. Next slide. If you happened to miss the customer service survey and you'd like to provide feedback, there are some opportunities to provide feedback at any time. That includes the Child Care Licensing Division inspection feedback form. You can email CCLD's customer service team, and you can also contact DELC field offices for the licensing support for your region. Lastly, there's going to be another customer service survey coming up in the summer of 2025. So if you missed it, you're more than welcome to provide or to participate next time, and we would really appreciate it. And I'm seeing if there are any questions. We have a couple of minutes set aside for question and answers related to the customer service survey. I saw something come through, but it seems more about preschool promise access related, and that's not something I can answer, so I'll leave that to my colleagues on the call.
Thank you, Lizzie. We don't have any questions so far in the chat related to this portion of the presentation, but if folks have more curiosities or questions, know they can find information online. Those links have been shared in the chat, and we are happy to take them as they come in as well. So if you have questions in Spanish or any other language, feel free to type them in your native language in the question and answers box, and we'll do our best to address them. Thank you, Lizzie. We will go ahead at this time and move on to our legislative session. So we have Director Chatterjee with us. Up to you.
Thanks, Karina. Good evening, everyone. My name is Alyssa Chatterjee. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the director of the Department of Early Learning and Care. And I wanted to share an update on the legislative session that we're currently in the midst of here in Oregon. If you can go to the next slide. So I wanted to just provide a little bit of kind of background, and I know this slide's a little bit tough to read with all these tiny boxes, but the state of Oregon, of course, has three branches: the legislative branch, executive branch, and judicial branch. As a state agency, we are a part of the executive branch, reporting to the governor. And we work with the legislative branch and the legislature to actually pass all agency budgets for the state of Oregon. Next slide. The legislative composition can shift for this session. There is a Democratic supermajority in both chambers. There are 16 new legislators that joined the legislature this year. And as you can see in these slides, there's been a lot of changes in terms of leadership. So while the Senate president remains the same as last session, all other positions have seen movement. And so it's just an opportunity to build more relationships, and it also means there might be different approaches and priorities under this new legislative leadership throughout session. Next slide. As a state agency, we have a couple different roles. So the first is setting our priorities. This is kind of a long process that actually happens before session even begins. All agencies are required to submit an agency request budget, or ARB, by September 1st of each even numbered year. So we released ours last fall. And this is meant to be sort of the list of needs that an agency identifies. This is the first agency request budget we developed under Governor Kotek. And agencies were given a 1% general fund cap, meaning for DELC, we could ask for things costing up to $6 million in state funds. And we could ask for things with federal funds outside of that. And this is in an effort to help the governor with her recommended budget, the governor's recommended budget, or GRB, which has to be a balanced budget. So once we submitted our agency request budget, the governor looks at all agency request budgets and the latest revenue forecasts to develop her balanced recommended budget, which comes out by December 1st. So whatever is in the governor's recommended budget becomes the priority of each state agency, including the Department of Early Learning and Care. If there are bills or funding requests outside of the governor's recommended budget, we as an agency don't take a position. We are not for or against that legislation, but we are able to provide information or answer questions folks have about other bills or funding possibilities that might be brought forward by advocates or other partners in the legislature. Another role for us during session is to analyze bills and see how much they would cost us. So as bills continue to move through the legislative process, we do an analysis, make sure we look at if there could be any problems or opportunities to improve a bill, and work with the sponsoring legislator to address those issues. And then as requested, we look at if there's any potential cost to the department to be able to implement that bill if it passes. The last piece is partner engagement and making sure we can provide regular updates to our partners about what we're learning and hearing, and making sure we're providing as much information as possible for lobbyists and partners to do their job in the building at the Capitol. Next slide. These are some key dates. And again, I know this is a tiny little screen grab, but there's a link in this slide as well to the full calendar. And thank you, Allison. Allison has dropped our agency request budget in the chat. It's very long. It's hundreds and hundreds of pages, but you can look through that and see what we put forward. And so session kicked off in January 21st. A key milestone for us is we actually had our about a week-long presentation in front of the Joint Ways and Means Subcommittee on Education, which is our budget committee. So we got to talk about DELC, the work that we do, and some of the funding requests that we have. There's a big deadline tomorrow. So any bill that doesn't have a work session posted by tomorrow will be considered to have died. And so a bill will go through a public hearing. That is when the committee hears the bill for the first time, maybe hears some public testimony from folks supporting the bill. And then a work session is when the committee decides whether that bill is going to go forward and be referred to a subsequent committee. So if it is not posted by tomorrow, then it is generally not going to move forward. And those bills have to have their work session by April 9th. So we're really coming to kind of a critical point in the session. The next big milestone is around May 14th. That is going to be the May revenue forecast. And that will be the last time the legislature has a revenue forecast to figure out what budget they will have to work with. And so then we'll start to see a little bit more work happening in terms of funding available for agency budgets and new funding requests. And then we'll get into kind of the second half, bills having to have a second work session by end of May. And the goal is for session to end by June 18th, but it will have to end by June 29th. So we're about midway, which is really exciting. And there's still a lot of work and unknowns ahead over the next 3 months. Next slide. So our legislative agenda, there are a few bills that DELC actually has requested. The first is House Bill 2811, and this is to establish the Imagination Library of Oregon program. In 2023, the legislature funded Dolly Parton's Imagination Library program, but it wasn't actually created in statute. So this would just establish the program officially in statute. House Bill 2814 is our licensing alignment bill. So there's two pieces to this bill, and the overarching goal is to create some consistency. One is we want to make sure that we don't set ratio in statute. Our registered family providers have ratio set in statute, whereas certified family and certified center are set in rule. And so we want to be able to have all of that in rules so that we can create more flexibility with programs in that for our registered family providers. The second piece, again with consistency, is we only have the ability to waive certain licensing requirements for registered family providers. And so similarly, we want to be able to have waivers for certified family and certified center programs. Again, giving us more flexibility to help you all run your programs. So that is another bill. Doesn't have a cost associated, but would give us a little bit more tools in our toolbox to be responsive to you all from a licensing perspective. Next slide. The next one is House Bill 2815. This is a bill that we have worked really closely on with the 9 federally recognized tribes within Oregon's borders. And it really is about making sure that the tribes get to say what they need and how they want to use resources. And so this would create a tribal early learning plan and fund that would require DELC to work with the tribes to define what our early learning goals should be for tribes that tribes want DELC to work towards. And it would also provide a dedicated fund for the tribes to meet those early learning goals that they set. And it would create a new Oregon Tribal Early Learning Alliance to really advise DELC on that work. And the last bill is House Bill 3818. This is a bill that we're actually still working with the legislature on. So some key dates I mentioned are going to be really critical over these next couple days. But this would really be doing some cleanup around the early childhood suspension and expulsion prevention work. And it would help us make sure that we shift the focus on requiring inclusive practices and just engaging with the prevention program, as opposed to focusing on the enforcement of a prohibition on suspension and expulsion activities. This would require all licensed and DELC-funded programs to contact the prevention program, which we now call Every Child Belongs, and receive services before removing a child from care. So we will keep you all updated as each of these bills do or don't move forward throughout the legislative session. Next slide. So overall impacts to DELC, this is referring to the governor's recommended budget that we are currently advocating for. The governor's goals were to expand early literacy and establish Oregon as a predictable funder of early learning. For DELC, that equates to over $1.5 billion in total funds for our budget, with over $25 million in new investments. It included $117 million for ERDC to cover some federal funds that ended. It also gives us some increased operating costs and increases the program budget for inflation by about $78 million. Next slide. We also have POPs. These are policy option packages that are really just budget requests. So our POP 101 is for operational support. This is making sure that we have accountants to pay folks on time, making sure that we have HR staff to help with recruitment, making sure we've got capacity to support Healthy Families Oregon, provide preschool promise monitoring, and a number of other things so that we can continue to provide strong customer service to you all as a state agency. Pop 580 is focused on birth through 5 literacy, and it is 12.5 million with a couple different components. It has 10 million for additional funding for the birth through 5 literacy plan. These funds we're proposing would be able to go to developing new guidelines for early educators, funding tribes, as well as funding partner programs like Reach Out and Read, Ready to Read, our early learning hubs, as well as parenting education hubs, and some of our home visiting programs. There's also 2.2 million to help Dolly Parton's Imagination Library reach 65% of eligible children, and another 0.3 million to help us revise early learning and kindergarten guidelines with the Oregon Department of Education. Next slide. There is also POP 105. This is actually a budget request leveraging federal funds. And this is about 3 million to help us address our licensing caseloads, increase some policy and investigations capacity, and overall just better meet customer service and language needs to bring our response times closer to best practice across the organization. Next slide. And then there are two additional funding recommendations in the governor's recommended budget that did not have a policy option package associated. The first is 4.7 million for that tribal early learning fund I mentioned earlier. This would allow tribes to be able to fund their goals for early learning and childcare. And then 4.3 million for infant early childhood mental health consultation to allow us to expand access to some intervention supports as part of our Every Child Belongs suspension and expulsion prevention program. Next slide. All right, that is it. Are there any questions that I missed?
Alyssa, we do have a couple of questions in the chat. We have a couple of questions specifically around the ERDC waitlist.
Sure.
If some of that funding is going to be able to help impact that waitlist and also help with the funding for all areas to get paid equally.
Yeah, great question. So, right now, the ERDC program is serving more families than ever before, and we know that there is a growing wait list and just need for access to subsidized childcare. The budget that is put forward here does not increase the budget for ERDC. It just makes sure we didn't lose the support we had with those federal funds ending. So there is 117 million in new dollars, but it's just to backfill money we were losing at the federal level. We do know that there are conversations happening and requests being made in the legislature to potentially help bring some families off the wait list. However, at this time, it's unlikely that the wait list would be lifted. So even if there are some investments that the legislature chooses to make, it would likely only bring a subset of those families on the wait list onto the program. The other piece, just to note, is that we do have about 11,000 families on the wait list. Families don't go through full eligibility screening, so it is not necessarily reflective of all the families that qualify for ERDC, but rather the number of families who are looking for access to subsidized childcare. So this is something that we'll continue to provide information to partners and the legislature for as they consider their budget going forward.
And then we have a question in the chat regarding House Bill 3818, asking if there will be services available to help programs help children. They know that referrals are difficult to come by.
Absolutely. So the bill itself is focused on kind of authority and requirements. It's making sure that we say that we're more focused on prevention and making sure that providers are able to or contact the prevention program, and then we have a responsibility as DELC to make sure you all get the services needed. However, that 4.3 million I mentioned in the governor's recommended budget is to increase some of the capacity for additional services. We know it's not going to lift all boats. It's not going to completely solve the problem. But one of the things that House Bill 3818 lets us do is it lets us really take that into consideration. If you, as a provider, have done everything you can, and the challenge is you're not receiving the services you need, then we're not going to penalize you, right? We want to really just focus on those prevention areas. One of the strategies that we know has been missing in Oregon is access to mental health consultation for birth through 5. And so that's one of the strategies that we've been trying to build up, and the governor's recommended budget would help us expand that capacity across the state.
Thank you. And no other new questions have entered the chat.
Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Alyssa. If we receive any other questions related to legislative session, we'll pass those along. I am going to share our agency and program updates for this evening. Christina, you can go to the next slide. Okay, so first, we have been sharing in our information sessions about the big family childcare rule revision that has been taking place for the last year or so. And we are excited to share that there will be several implementation supports available in the coming months. So as you may know, the Certified Family and Registered Family programs have new rules that are effective July 1st of this year. And so to help you all be in compliance with those rules, understand the new rules, we will have the video series available, some webinars coming up in May, and then some other supports like technical assistance documents that really outline changes for you all. So this is a heads up that more information is coming soon. We do have some translated rule books available on DELC's website right now. We are still waiting for some, but the link is in the chat, so you can check out those rule books now and really just be in touch with your licensing specialist if you have any questions in the immediate future, but more to come on family child care. We can go to the next slide. Another big rule set is our outdoor nature-based rules. So this is actually the first time that we've had rules for outdoor nature-based programs. In the 2023 legislative session, there was a House bill that passed and required DELC to create a pathway for licensing this type of program, and we are so close to the finish line. So the rules will be going to the Early Learning Council next week, and our hope is that the rules will pass and be effective on July 1st of 2025. If you're interested in joining our Early Learning Council meeting to kind of see what that rulemaking process is like, putting that link in the chat so you can follow along. And we can go to the next update. Lizzie mentioned this feedback form in their presentation earlier. This is the Child Care Licensing Division inspection feedback form. It's available on DELC's website, really to help us collect information about provider experiences with CCLD inspections. This is not a complaint form. If you have a specific concern about an interaction, please do tell us, but you can use the channel of your regional manager or our customer service line. The phone number is at the bottom of this slide. But if you have feedback about the support that you received or didn't receive during a CCLD inspection, please share it with us. This helps CCLD to improve their practices, processes, all of our training efforts. Put that in the chat for you. And we can go to the next slide, Christina. Okay, so Every Child Belongs. Lissa spoke to Every Child Belongs earlier tonight, but really just wanted to highlight for you all this name change because we haven't presented to this audience before. The Suspension Expulsion Prevention Program, or ESEP, as we were previously calling it, is now known as Every Child Belongs. This program is intended to support educators in building healthy learning environments for children 6 weeks to 5 years. And there are a lot of supports underway statewide. Some of the regional support services will begin as early as this July. And this is all in support of the suspension expulsion ban that's effective July 2026. So we're starting to roll out some of these support services early to really create a strong foundation for you all when the ban goes into effect. So I'll put a link to the Every Child Belongs program information in the chat as well. And we can go to the next. Okay, I think this is our last update. Thanks for hanging in there. The ERDC program, so the statewide subsidy program, employment related daycare, is drafting some policies that we need to change in order to comply with some federal guidance around how we pay providers. We really want your feedback during this process. And there's another feedback form that I will link to in the chat. We are collecting feedback through the end of April, so April 20th. Please share your thoughts. We've had very limited response so far, but we want to hear from you about your preferences with payment practices. So please do participate. I think that is it. Okay, thank you, Christina. We can move, there might be one more. There we go. We will have a feedback form and I can hand it over to Karina.
Gracias, Al. Thank you so much, Al. That was a lot of information we covered today. We actually did really well on time. So are also watching the Q&A. I think we had some questions about the audio. Hopefully it worked out for people. But thank you so much for joining us. There will be, the meeting tonight, there will be a link for a survey, and then also here on screen and in the chat, you'll find the link to subscribe to the childcare updates. So that is a great resource and a great and sent out about every 2 weeks, and it'll be the best and quickest way for you to get information and get updates as those are coming right, hot off the press from Delk. Oh, I saw a little bubble. Okay, nothing there. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for joining us today. We'll come back in May. And May, we, just as a reminder, we're doing these information sessions every 2 weeks. Thanks so much for the time you shared with us this evening, for all of the work that you do with children, and see you soon.